Recently, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding Nintendo, specifically about their latest Direct. The main complaint people have been throwing around, especially recently, is that Nintendo's starting to feel soulless. And I can kind of see where these people are coming from. After all, if you compare the Nintendo Switch home menu compared to the Wii or the 3DS, the Wii allowed you to move games around with the Wii channel, and then the 3DS not only had themes, but you could also move games around. On the Switch, you could do none of those things. You can't move your games around at all, no folders, and no themes. And if you look at Nintendo's Directs, they're also starting to feel soulless there too. If you look at their earlier Directs, they have much more personality and skits compared to today, where they feel completely soulless. And this is especially obvious because a Nintendo Direct is just a glorified ad presentation for an hour. And it's impressive that Nintendo's got this many people to sit down to watch ads for an hour, when people complain about 15-second ads on YouTube. But Nintendo doesn't make the Directs interesting anymore because they don't have to. But you would think they would at least try to make it somewhat entertaining for a glorified ad presentation. Now I will admit that Nintendo did start off their Direct strong with the Mario Galaxy movie. And it's because anyone who grew up with Mario Galaxy has to watch this movie. Now the target audience is probably going to be 16 to 28 years old, so they better not make this movie really cringe for like 10-year-olds. But it would make sense that they re-release these games for people who haven't grown up with the Galaxy games. Now it's interesting to release Galaxy 2 because there was a conspiracy theory when 3D All-Stars came out that Nintendo wants people to forget about Galaxy 2 because they hate this game or something. That was the theory. Now obviously this isn't true, and that's why it's great that these games are $40 each. Just to put this in comparison, if you were to get both of these games on eBay, it would cost you around $30 to $40, and if you backed up these games, you could play them in HD on an emulator. Or you could spend $70 to get both games on Nintendo Switch 2. Or the original, they re-released it there too. But the most baffling part of the Direct is when they soft-launched the Virtual Boy again. And it's baffling because this was Nintendo's worst-selling console of all time. No one cared about this thing, and I don't know why they thought it was a good idea to re-release this console. It's not like they're even making any new games for this thing. And making the shell $100, who's gonna buy that? But the worst part of the Direct is when Nintendo announced that Legend ZA DLC will be $30. Now call me crazy, but it seems like this DLC is really just a $30 microtransaction that make people pay to get access to Mega Raichu X and Y. And the story is just there as an added treat so people don't feel as bad for spending $30 just to get a Mega Evolution. Now why would I even claim this? Well, if any of you have played Pokemon Go, you might be familiar that you have the ability to buy passes that allow you to get mythicals in Pokemon Go, and this is only for a limited time. Now I get this is the mobile game, and people like to distance Nintendo from their mobile games because Nintendo isn't the kind of company that charge microtransactions in their game. That's one of the reasons why people put Nintendo above all these other companies, because they're not like the other companies. But let's call a spade a spade. This really just seems like a $30 microtransaction. But speaking of Nintendo fans, it seems like they love to defend Nintendo, and a lot more than other companies. Why is that? And when I did some digging, the closest reaction I found is a few years ago when Xbox fans were distraught when Microsoft said they're going to be stepping away from the Xbox and not focusing on it as much. You had people crying and devastated over this. And it seems like the reason why Nintendo fans care so much is because in order to even play their games, you need to own their console. And it usually will cost $300+ just to get access to one of their consoles. And since you're playing all their games on their console, you begin to develop an identity as a Nintendo fan, especially because they have so many game series on their console. And one of the things I've seen is people say, where is all this criticism with X, Y, or Z? And a big reason is because the Nintendo fanbase is so insulated that people that complain about modern game practices might not even be aware of what Nintendo is doing in the first place because they just don't own a Nintendo system. And if you spend $500 for a Nintendo Switch 2, it's really hard to be like, oh, well I don't agree with Nintendo's pricing, so I'm not going to buy their game. You bought their console to play their games, so if you change your mind, well you just spent $500. And the reason why Nintendo's doing this is something I would like to call the EA rule. If you have a game series that gains enough loyalty that ends up being owned by a corporation, it is inevitable that that corporation will take advantage of its loyal fans. And I'm calling this the EA rule because EA was notorious for buying indie games, making a garbage game, and cashing in on loyal fans just to put the game in their graveyard. And to speak to how well this worked, there was a year where EA was the most hated company. And you might think, well, why does this show how well it worked? Because If you are the most hated company, there has to be enough people that care about you and know about your existence to hate you in the first place. Because at the end of the day, EA's strategy worked. And you see other companies follow terrible practices too, with battle passes, microtransactions, online-only games. And a classic example is Call of Duty, that releases the same game every year, charges battle passes, microtransactions, all that stuff. And Nintendo's no different. Now, Nintendo used to charge a high price for their games in the past, but there's only so many ways they could be shady back in the day. Now, back in the day when Nintendo was the most popular console, they would charge really high premium prices for their games because they could. Now, when Nintendo lost popularity, they couldn't afford that luxury anymore. Even with the Wii, even though it sold really well, it didn't really sell that many games. So come to the Nintendo Switch, they finally are selling games like hotcakes. You have Pokemon games on the system that are some of the best selling Pokemon games of all time. Even series like Metroid that no one really cares about is selling great numbers. And so because of this, they're able to re-release games like Wii U games for $50, $60 because they can, because they know people will buy it. And they also know that you bought the Nintendo Switch to play Nintendo games, so it's pretty hard to say no to these prices. And when you get to the Switch 2, it had so much hype around it that they could charge whatever they want and they know people would say yes because people were so excited for the system. And the warning signs were already there when they charged money for Welcome Tour and charged $20 just to upgrade Breath of the Wild to utilize the Switch 2 features, which should have been free, as it is free on PlayStation and Xbox. Yet on Nintendo, if you want to upgrade your game, you have to spend money. Suffice to say, Nintendo will not stop these practices anytime soon. And what made this Nintendo DLC worse is that right before, Stardew Valley announced their own DLC that would be free for the Switch 2. And this brings me into the 3 ways people deal with this stuff. The first camp is people that won't put up with it. Because people are finding out that if your loyalty lies with indie games, more often than not it's rewarded. And even if it isn't and you are taken advantage of, you only are down $20. And indie games are so cheap that they're much easier to try compared to a $60 game. And you might have noticed indie games becoming more and more popular. And this is one of the reasons why. It's also because they take up less space, and they actually respect your time, which a lot of modern games aren't doing as much. Even Nintendo's falling into the trap of making every game an open world game, to the point where it ruins some of the experience of the games. The second group of people are the people that put up with it. These are both the defenders and the complainers. The complainers are the people that complain about the Switch 2 prices, the game prices, but still buy the Switch 2 and the games anyway. Then you have the defenders that try to justify why Nintendo's charging $500 or $80 for Mario Kart World. Or why Nintendo's charging a $30 DLC just to get access to Mega Raichu. And then finally you have the people that just don't care. And a great example is the mobile game industry. It's been a great experiment to see what happens when you have companies just try and take advantage of their fans as much as possible. The only people left are the people that just don't care and will just buy whatever the game tells them to, no matter the price. And that's how you have people spend thousands of dollars on these mobile games, because they just don't care. Now the good news is that indie games are on every console, so you don't even need to own a PC to get access to some of these great games. And even if you did buy a Switch 2, no one's forcing you to buy these Nintendo games that are upsold. And even if you do own a Switch 2, no one's forcing you to buy these Nintendo games despite the pressure. You could still buy these indie games, or you could still play Stardew Valley, which again has free DLC. Even a game like Terraria has so much DLC that it would be worth $60, but you could still get it on Steam for $15. And that's one of the nice things, is that if you decide to play these indie games on PC, not only are the graphics not as intense, but also the prices are cheaper. So there's a big advantage of playing on PC. But what's nice for console is that the better indie games are the ones that tend to come to console. But anyway, the point is that Nintendo's not going to stop these practices. So boycotting's not going to work. There's no such thing as boycotting Nintendo changes. The only thing that's going to change is that you stop playing Nintendo games and move on to other games that actually respect your time. And the reason why things won't change is because of the EA rule. So hopefully this clears up the controversy and provides a bit of insight into why things are playing out the way they are. Thank you for watching. If you like this, please consider subscribing.